So in a previous session, we considered FRA and we considered futures. Now, we did mention that there is one major drawback with futures. And that is a lot of drawbacks, really, but one major one for most strategic managers. And that is the fact that if once you enter into a futures agreement, you cannot take advantage of a favorable movement in rate. So what do I mean by that? So let's assume that Mr. Bighard has entered into an agreement like we discussed in the previous class to fix interest rate at 6.18%, which is the futures rate LIBOR. But when it got to December 16th, the actual interest rate dropped to 5%. Mr. Bighard cannot say, oh, because the interest rate has dropped to 5%, I no longer want to proceed because they have an agreement for 6.18%. And that's one of the big drawbacks with futures. And so most strategic financial managers want a situation where they are able to get the right, but not an obligation. The right, but not an obligation to proceed. So if it favors them, they go ahead with it. If it doesn't favor them, they let it be. And that's what and that leads us to the third method we're asked to calculate, which is called an option. And we said an option gives the holder the right, but not the obligation to proceed with the contract. Okay, so let's outline the detailed steps you would take whenever you are solving a question on options. What steps would you take? Okay, so these are the steps you typically take. Please do not go out of the steps. If you don't go out of the steps, you would not get it wrong. The first step would be to determine the date. The date or applicable option. So we're going to do this in the next 15-20 minutes. Because it's a market. So when you go into the market, you're going to see different products, different dates. So we want to know what it would be the right date for us. The second would be to determine our hedging strategy. And for options, the hedge strategy would be one of two. It would either be a call option or a put option. We're going to explain both as we solve the question. The third would be to determine the number of contracts. The fourth step would be that where we have more than one option of the same date and strategy, we need to choose the right one. So where we have more than one option in the market, for a selected date and strategy and hedge strategy, we have to determine the most appropriate. Okay, we're going to do that. Our exam question is going to bring that out for us. And then the fifth step would be for us to calculate the hedging strategy. And then finally, the sixth step would be for us to evaluate whether or not to take the option. On the requirement date. Okay, so these are the 6 steps we're going to take. And the good thing about our approach is that some of these steps are similar to what we did with futures. So we're just going to apply the same steps. And let's look at the steps. So let's go through them one at a time. Our first step, we're going to look at them one at a time, beginning with our first step. So let's go to our question on options. Let's go back to our question, but we need to solve the question. It's a practice at the past session. Okay. So this part of the question, so we're looking at options. This part of the question speaks to options. This part of the question from here down to here speaks on options. So we're going to be looking more at that part. So let's get right into it. Whenever we're solving a question on option, the first thing we would do, which would be our first step, would be to determine the applicable dates. That's our first step, determine the applicable date. And that's very important because when you go through the options market in our question, you would realize that there are different options in the market. So let's look at that quickly. Let's look at that quickly and see what is in the options market in our question. Okay, so right here you can see that we have September, we have December, and we have March. So there are 3 options. So we need to select or determine which of these 3 options is applicable for us. Now the rule is the same as with futures. The rule is the same as with futures. Who would like to quickly remind us, if you may? You can raise your hand and I would unmute you. What would be the rule on selecting our futures from our first class? Who would want to unmute and give that a try if you're in the first class? Okay, so I guess we can go back to the rule. We can go back to the rule. Okay, Tolu, please go ahead.
The first rule is the first step is to determine the futures to buy. That's the first step.
Yeah, can you go ahead, Tolu? I can hear you.
Hello, sir. Good evening, sir. Can you hear me, sir? Sir, can you hear me, sir? Good evening, sir.
Could it be at my end?
Good evening, sir. Can you hear me,
can
sir?
you take that again? I think it was at my end. I was using a different mic. Can you take that to Lou one more time, please?
Good evening, sir. So from our previous lecture, the first thing is to determine.
Maybe my speakers at my end, it's not clear, so I really can't hear. But can you guys hear me? If you can hear me, give me a thumbs up, and then I'll just proceed. If you can hear me, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay. All right, great. So let's get right into it. All right. So we're saying that the rules is the same as in futures. And what is the rule we discussed in futures? We said that whenever you want to buy either a futures or you want to buy an options, that the futures you would buy would be the futures that is open as of the date we intend to borrow or invest. The future that is open as at when we intend to borrow or invest. In our question, Mr. Big Heart intends to borrow on December 16th. So if you look at it here, I'm sure this is where it stays. It says Mr. Big Heart intends to borrow on December 16th. So that is when he needs to make the payment. And given that he intends to borrow on December 16th, we need a future that is an option rather that is open on December 16th. And the question tells us right here that our options, our contract matures, all our derivative contract matures at the end of the month. So he needs to borrow December 16th. There are 3 months, contract. So they are 3 months contract and they expire at the end of the month. So what that definitely means is that our September option, which is what we have here, expires on September 30th. And that would have been open for July to September. We need our money. We need to Mr. Baker needs to borrow December 16th. So that September contract will not be open by December. So he can't go for September option. The December option would expire December 31st. And because it's 3 months, it covers the period October to December. And we need to borrow December 16th. And December 16th happens to fall within this range. So that option is open as of when we need to borrow. So the applicable option would be the December option. The option we would go for rather would be the December option. Okay. So our options now. So the first thing is the option date. So we'd say that the applicable option is the December option, as this will still be open when Mr. Big Heart intends to borrow. So we're going to buy at December options. Now, the next thing would be to determine what is our hedging strategy. So just like in futures, in options too, we have a hedging strategy. And the hedging strategy would be either a call or a put. Either a call or a put. Now, the call option is the strategy that would always be taken by an investor. And a put strategy is the option that would always be taken by a borrower. When we say a call option, we're basically referring to the right to buy an option. And we say put option, we're referring to the right to sell an option. So if Mr. Big Heart is an investor, In other words, he's interested, he's concerned about interest rate related to investment, he would go for a call option strategy. But if Mr. Big Heart is a borrower, he would go for a put option strategy. So that's a free mark. So let's go to our question and look at what is Mr. Big Heart. Is he looking at investment in terms of interest rate on investment, or is he looking at borrowing in terms of interest rate on borrowing? And that tells us what hedging strategy would be applicable to him. So right to our question quickly. Which one is Mr. Big Heart? Let's go back to our question quickly. Right back to who Mr. Big Heart, what's interested in. Okay, so the question says that Mr. Big Heart, just a quick recap for those that missed the first class, says that Mr. Big Heart is, okay, right, you want to quickly say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I said
I guess in the first class.
Mr. Big Heart is a borrower. So the put option, we'll go for the put option.
Are you there?
Hello, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah. Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, I figured that out now. I can hear you. Go ahead.
Good evening, sir. I said Mr. Big Heart is a borrower. So he will go for G.
Yes, so because he's a borrower, he will go for what? The put hedging strategy, because that is a hedging strategy that is applicable to a borrower. Thank you very much for that. I remember you in the first class. Yes, and that is what we have in here. We said, let's quickly recap for those that are joining for the first time. So Mr. Big Heart is a successful businessman, has a lot of investment in different industry. But right now, he is interested in buying, from the question, is interested in buying a La Liga League football club. And to buy that club, he needs 150 million. That's what he needs to buy the club. So he needs to borrow 150 million. So he's a borrower. However, he needs that money on December 16th. Today is September 16th. He needs the money on December 16th, and he needs the loan for a period of 2 months. So Mr. Big Heart is clearly a borrower. So because he's a borrower, the applicable strategy would be a put option. So we'll just write that down quickly and get a quick marks. Quick, cheap, easy mark on that. It can either be a put or a call strategy, depending on who the individual is or what the individual is interested in. So because Mr. Baker is a borrower, the strategy would be a put strategy. So let's write that down quickly. So we can say, so you don't need to write this in your answer booklet. I just use this to explain it, please. So I just use this to explain the concept or the principle on that. Okay, so we can put this given that Mr. Big Heart is a borrower. The applicable hedging strategy is a put option, which is the right to sell future, which is the right to sell option, which is the right to sell the December options. Which is the right to sell the December option. That is with the applicable strategy for Mr. Big Heart. So let's go back to our question quickly on that option and even see the value. So now we've narrowed down. We've narrowed down to the fact that Mr. Big Heart is interested in December, and is interested in just put, because that is his strategy. So let's go back to our question and even see what we have in that table. So we can just maybe just cancel out the part we don't need, because we established what we really need. So we established that, going back right to our question. Yeah, so we established that September is not applicable because it's not open. March is not applicable because it's not open. So we established that. Now we've established that what we need is put and not call. So what all the information you have here to here is a waste of our paper by ICAN, because they are not applicable. So this is what is applicable, this and this is what we'll focus more on. The other, all the other information is not applicable because they're not applicable to Mr. Bighart's borrowing. Good one. All right. So now we've determined the option to go for and our strategy. Our next step would be to determine the number of contracts. And we explained in our previous class or session why we need to calculate the number of contracts. It is because options like futures are standardized contracts. So they are sold in blocks. They are sold in blocks. So we need to determine how many blocks we need to buy, because so they are sold in blocks. And that's why if you look at the question itself again quickly, it mentions there, it mentions here that our options have a contract size of 500,000 contract size. So it has to be in blocks of 500,000, 1 million, 1.5 etc, because they are sold in blocks. So how many contracts would we require? Now the formula is basically the same with our futures. It's just that where we have futures, we replace it with option. So where is that our formula for number of contracts in futures? Yeah. So these are formula for the number of contracts in under future. We said amount divided by contract size multiplied by the tenure of the loan or investment divided by futures duration. But we're doing option. So where we have futures, we replace with option. So that for option, it would be divided by what? Option duration. Every other thing would be the same. So let's just get that down. You can see that the two methods are closely related. So once you understand futures very well from what we discussed, the second one would be, most of the steps are almost the same. So number of contracts. So it is the amount that Mr. Bighart needs to borrow or invest, depending on what he's doing. But in our case, Mr. Bighart is borrowing, divided by the option contract size. So you need to pay attention to this, because the contract size you have under futures might be different from the contract size you have under options. So just pay attention to that. We're going to take a look at that again when we go back to our question. Multiplied by the tenor of the loan / investment, depending on what the guy is doing, all over option duration. Okay, so from our question, we've established that Mr. Bighart needs 150 million. So there's no need to start ourselves looking for that in the question. Let's look at what the contract size is and how long he needs that money. Okay, so we're going right back to our question. Okay, so you can see that under futures, the contract size was given to us as 500K. And coincidentally as well, under option, it was given to us as 500K. Sometimes ICAN might give you different value. So just use the value that is applicable for what you are solving. So if, for example, the option was 200K and the futures was 500K, we would use 500K under futures and then we'll use 200K under option. So please pay attention to that so you don't mix them up. They're two different stuff. So the contract size is 500K. Now, when Mr. Big Hat borrows, how long? What is the tenor? This line here, I don't want to read it all over because we read it in our first class, mentions that he needs a 2 months loan. So the tenor of the loan will be for 2 months. And then finally, what is the duration of the contracts of the option? The options are 3 months. Options on 3 months. So the options are 3 months options. So let's put that into our formula. The options are 3 months option. He needs to borrow for 2 months. The contract size is 500,000. Okay, so we just go right down to a question. Okay, so 150 million divided by 500 multiplied by 10 of the loan is for 2 months, and the option duration is 3. Okay, so how many contracts? I think it coincidentally should be the same as what we have under our option because the values are all the values are the same. So that would be 150 million divided by 500,000 multiplied by 2 divided by 3 gives us 200 contracts. Gives us 200 contracts. So that's the number of contracts that option contract that Mr. Big Hat would be interested in. And let's quickly go back to our table again to see why we need step 4. So what is our step 4? Our step 4 says, is that 4? It says, where we have more than one option in the market for a selected date and hedge strategy, we have to determine the most appropriate to go for. We need to determine the most appropriate to go for. So let's get right back to our question and see why that is necessary and that action is important. So let's go to our question quickly and see why that action is important. We've established that we need December option and put. However, in the market, we have more than one December option. Let's take a look. So you look at it. We have a December option that has a price of 93. Okay, so there's a dot here that was missed out of this question. So we have an option that is 93.75 exercise price and has a premium of 0.085. So that is one option. We have another option that has an exercise price of 94 and has a premium of 0.255. That's a second option. We have a third option that has an exercise price of 94.25 but has a premium of 0.48, and that's 3. So Mr. Big Hat needs to select one out of the 3. He needs to select one out of the 3. So we need to determine which of these 3 would be most appropriate for Mr. Big Hat. Okay. So premium cost in annual percentage. Okay. So let's determine which of them will be most appropriate. So the prices are 93.75, 94, and then 94.25. Now those values, just like in our futures, are called market reference rate. We explained that in our first class. So if you want to convert these values to percentage, who would like to quickly remind us from our first class, how do we convert those values to percentage? We did that on that when we treated futures. Love to hear someone's voice. How do we convert those values to percentage? On our futures. Okay, Ola, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. You subtract them from 100 to get the percentage.
Perfect. 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 you subtract it from 100. So you want to know the percentage equivalent, you subtract it from 100. So let's even determine what is even the percentage attached to those different options, December options. Then we add the premium to it and determine what the total cost is, and then we can make a decision on which of them is the most appropriate. Okay, sorry, let me pick that the dates again. So I know the middle is 94, the last one is 94.25 was the first one. Let me quickly pick that again quickly. 94.25. The first one is 93.75. So we're trying to determine those different options, which of them should we go for? Because for that date that for the month that we need for our hedging strategy, they have more than one in the market. So that's our next step. If we had only one, just one in December, we don't have to do step 4. We're only doing step 4 because we have more than one December in the market that is a put option. That's why we're doing step 4. So please take note of that. Evaluating available options. So we have the exercise price, which is the interest rate that will be agreed upon if you go for that particular one. The first one is 93.75. So to get the percentage, that would be 100 minus 93.75. The second one is 94. So that's 100 minus 94. The third one is 94.25. So that is 100 minus 94.25. Okay. So let's look at what the exercise price is. So the first one, 100 minus 93.75. So that's 6.25. This is 6%. It's pretty straightforward. And then the last one, 100 minus 94.25, gives us 5.75%. Those are the different ones in the market. However, for you to have the right to borrow, at maybe 6.25, 6% or 5.75, depending on which one the Mr. Big Hat goes for, Mr. Big Hat needs to pay an option premium upfront. Is when he pays that option premium for whichever one he pays for that gives him that right. So option premium. He has to pay it upfront. Okay, so what is the option premium for the first one, the second one, as well as the last one? So let's go back to our question quickly and get what the option premium are, the different ones. Okay, so we're going back right down to our question. Okay, so these are the option premium. For the first one, it is 0.085. For the second one, it is 0.255. And for the last one, it is 0.480. 0.085, 0.225, and 0.480. So I'm taking that in. So that is 0.085, 0.255, then 0.48. Okay. Okay, so what's our total cost? So the first one, 6.25 plus 0.085 has a total cost of 6.335. The second one, 6.255. And the last one, 0.48 plus 5.75 gives us 6.23. Okay, good. Now, pay attention to this. There are two methods that ICAN accepts for the purpose of deciding which of the option to go for. Two methods. So if you use any of the two methods in exam, you'll be correct. And the reason I need to point out these two methods is because in some Pathfinder, ICAN will use one method, and then in another Pathfinder, the same interest rate, they would use a different method. So if you use any of the methods, you're going to have different answers, but the two methods are generally accepted as a strategy for selecting options. So please pay attention to it. So first method, one, select the option with the least total cost. Now, if we are to select the option with the least total cost, which of them will be the least one? The last one. So if we are to go with that first method, it would be the last one. So basically mean that we would select the option with exercise price of 5.75% and option premium of 0.48% if we go for that method. That is one of the two accepted methods. The second method that ICAN accepts, which they use interchangeably in solving interest rate, would be that they accept it if students decide to go for the option or select the option whose exercise price is equal to, let me write it in full, is equal to, so it doesn't. So whose exercise price is equal to the current variable rate. In this case, it is LIBOR. So the current variable rate, in other words, the current LIBOR. So the big first question then would be, what is the current LIBOR? For Mr. Bighard, what is the current LIBOR? So the current LIBOR, let's go to the question and see if we know what the current LIBOR is. And then we check if we have an exercise price that is equal to that current LIBOR. And if we have one, we can pick that as the option to select. And the reason is because when we started, we said risk is about managing uncertainty. So if you have an option that keeps what you already know, then why are you stressing yourself over what you don't know? So that's basically the reasoning around that. But those are the two accepted methods. So let's look at what our current LIBOR is right now. Let's go to our question and see what the current LIBOR is in the question. I think we make use of it when we're calculating our basis under futures. But let's look at what the question says and what the current variable rate or LIBOR is. Okay. So the question says somewhere here, I don't want to read the entire question because we read it before, but I'm just going to highlight what it said. It said currently LIBOR is at 6%. Currently, the current LIBOR is at 6%. So if we look at those three options we have in the market, do we have any that gives us an exercise price of 6% on the dot? If we do, then we have a choice to select that as the option for Mr. Bigheart to go for. So current LIBOR is 6%. Okay, so current LIBOR is 6%. So do we have the options we have in the market? Do we have any one that gives us an exercise price of 6% on the dot? Yes, we do. We have this. So if we are to go with the second accepted method, we will select LIBOR, or sorry, the option that has exercise price of 6%. And premium of 0.255. Now, because these are two acceptable methods, we must write in our answer booklet which method we are going for. So guys, which of these two methods, let me hear from one or two people and then we'll make a choice. Which of these two methods do we think we should adopt in selecting the option we should go for from the three available in December? What does your instinct tell you? I need to pick one. We can pick any of the two is accepted. So what do you guys think? Let's hear one or two guys. What do you think? Should we go with the least, or should we go with the one that gives us a LIBOR that is equal to the current exercise price? Now, generally, I prefer to go with the least one because I don't have to bother myself looking for what the current LIBOR is from the question. But some people prefer to go with the LIBOR. So what do you guys think? Who wants to throw a coin and tell us what they think? Who would like to do that? Anybody? Okay, so let's go with the least. So we're going to do with option one, which is the least. And that's the approach we're going to adopt for our options. So out of the three, we're going to select, out of the three options we have in the question, we're going to select the one that gives us the least total cost. And that will be the third option. So we have selected the option that produces the least total cost. Exercise price of, what's the exercise price of that one? 5.75%. However, to get this right, Mr. Bigheart needs to pay an option premium. Needs to pay an option premium. So let's calculate what the option premium would be. So let's calculate what the option premium would be. Now, there are two methods for calculating option premium. I don't know if I should teach you guys the two or should just stick to one. Let's do the two. There are two methods. You don't have to do the two in exam. Just pick one and move on. So I'll just quickly do the two at the time. Yeah, quickly do the two. The first method has the formula, our premium rate multiplied by the number of contracts that we calculated the number of contracts that we calculated, multiplied by the contract size, multiplied by our option duration, not the duration of the loan, but the option duration. Divided by the number of months in a year, which is 12. So that's our first formula. So let's do our first formula quickly. Let's plug in the values quickly in our first formula. We should have them quickly to plug in. So I need to accept someone in. Okay, so we should have the values quickly to plug in. Our premium rate, we're going for 5.75%. What's the premium rate on that? The premium on that is 0.48%. If we went for the 6% one, which is option 2, the premium on that would have been 0.255. So please take note of that, depending on which of the two accepted method we go for. So it's 0.48%. So that is 0.48%, which would be 0.48 divided by 100, multiplied by the number of contracts. How many contracts is Mr. Big Heart selling? How many contracts? 200 contracts. 200 contracts. Contract size. What is our option contract size? We use it when we're calculating number of contract, which is contract size. 500K. Multiply by the option duration. So I don't need to go to my question. I have all of the information when I was calculating number of contract. So this is option duration 3. Divided by 12. Okay, so what's our premium? Okay, that's 0.48 divided by 100, multiplied by 200, multiplied by 500K, multiplied by 3, divided by 12. 120,000. That's our first method. I should just do the two methods, just so that in case you prefer the second, but 2 are accepted, or in case you see another method in the Pathfinder, so any of the 2 is accepted. You don't have to do the 2, you only need to do 1. So the second option would be the premium rate multiplied by 100. And basically, we're making this multiplication by 100 because we're interested in the premium rate in basis point. So whatever the premium rate is multiplied by 100. We multiplied it by our number of contracts rather. Multiplied by our tick size. We have our tick size given to us in the question. So our premium rate is 0.48 multiplied by 100. Whatever the answer is, we multiply by the number of contracts, which is 200. Whatever the answer is, multiply by our tick size. So let's get right back to our question quickly. I'm timing myself to see what our tick size is from the question. Okay, so let's get right into our question to see what our tick size is. Somewhere in the question, you're going to have the information tick size and the value given to you. Okay, somewhere. Okay, it's right. So it's right here. We have a tick size as 12.50. So let's get that right in. Okay, where are we? Okay. 12.50. So what do we have? Do we have 120,000 as well? I think we should. So that would be 0.48 multiplied by 100 gives us 48. Multiplied by 200 gives us 96. Multiplied by 12.5 gives us 120,000. So which of these two methods do you prefer? You don't have to do the two, please. Just take any of them. Whichever one you're comfortable with, you can either do one or two. They are two different, just like you have different formula of calculating the same thing. Which of them do you prefer? Okay, so that's the choice for you to make. So maybe when you practice 2 more questions, you decide on which of the two methods you want to stick with. But those are 2 methods of calculating our option premium. Now, Mr. Bighart would pay this 120,000, and that will give Mr. Bighart the right, but not the obligation, to borrow at 5.75%. So once Mr. Bighart pays this 120, it's a sunk cost. They can't recover it. If they decide by December, they pay the 120,000 now. If by December interest rate is say 3%, and they decide to say, oh, because interest rate, the real interest rate in the market is 3%, we don't want to go ahead, all they will lose will be this 120K because they can't recover it. So they'll tell the option dealer, sorry, we don't want to take the option because we prefer to borrow from the market because the current rate is lower. And if they still decide to go ahead, good or fine. It all depends on what the exchange rate is in the market. So let's evaluate the possible decisions Mr. Bighart could make depending on his fear or his expectation. So what is Mr. Bighart's expectation? Let's go to our question. When Mr. Bighart wanted to borrow, he had some fear. What were his fears? Let's go right back into our question. Mr. Bighart had some fears, which is the reason why he asked you, strategic financial manager, to help him devise a hedging strategy. Okay, so Mr. Big had some fears. What are his fears? I think it's stated right here. Right here. It says, the bank, right, I'm reading here. The bank has also suggested, so LIBOR is currently 6%. We already know that. We know LIBOR is 6%. Now, the bank has also suggested that due to the current economic uncertainty, LIBOR may rise by 1% or even fall by 0.5% over the coming months. So between now and when Mr. Bighart intends to borrow, there's that fear. Mr. Bighart intends to borrow December 16. Now, today is September 16 from our question. There's that fear that LIBOR might rise by 1% or it might fall by 0.5%. So 2 possible outcomes. If it rises by 1%, what will be the total? 6 plus 1, 7. If it falls by 0.5%, what will be the total? 6 minus 0.5, 5.5. So let's look at what would happen or what our decision would be with an option based on those 2 scenarios. So which is the last part of our option is to evaluate the option. That's the last part. So let's evaluate the option. So let's assume that in December 16th, this is our assumption, when Mr. Bighart intends to borrow, our assumption, that LIBOR indeed increases by 1%. So currently it is 6 plus 1 becomes 7. What will Mr. Bighart do? Alternatively, let's assume that instead of the LIBOR increasing, it falls by 0.5%. So 6 minus 0.5, which is 5.5%. What will Mr. Bighart do? Now, don't forget, Don't forget that our exercise price is how much? Is what rate? We bought an option that gives us the right to borrow at 5.75%. That's our exercise price. We've paid the option premium upfront, and it gives us the right to borrow at 5.75%. So regardless of what the actual exchange rate is, this is 5.75%, regardless of what the actual rate is. Now, let me pay attention to this extra bit I want to bring in, because we need to adjust that our assumption. Okay, we need to adjust our assumption a little bit, and I'm going to explain why what adjustment we're doing. Our option that we bought is December option, and December option matures December 31st. This matures December 31st. Mr. Big Hat needs to borrow on December 16th. So the fear is that this might be the rate on December 16th. That's the fear. That might be the rate on December 16th. So we can't compare a December 16th value against a December 31st value. We need to look for a way to compare like for like. So it's either we adjust this December 16th to December 31st equivalent, or we adjust the December 31st equivalent to December 16th. The method ICAN would typically recommend, and which most people would use, would be to adjust this to this. And how do we adjust it? Very easy. A straightforward formula. It is the rate minus our outstanding basis. We already calculated our outstanding basis when we did futures, so we don't need to calculate it again. So if you're in a class in futures, you saw we calculated our outstanding basis, so we don't need to calculate it again when we're doing option, just to adjust it so that we are comparing like for like. So our outstanding basis when we did futures, what was the value again? Let's go to our basis calculation. So if you missed that part of the class, please watch out for the video, which I'll share by weekend, and you can catch up on how we calculated that. So this is our remaining or outstanding basis minus 0.03. Minus 0.03. That's the remaining basis. So we need to make that adjustment so that we can compare like for like. Okay, so that would be, our adjusted rate would be 7 minus 0.03. Okay, so minus gives us plus, so that would be 7.03. The same thing with this one as well. 5.5 minus 0.03. That gives us 5.53. We now have to make a decision. Do we exercise? Do we go to the option guy and say, yes, we want to take our right to borrow at the rate we agreed, or not? And let's begin with the second one. You had paid Mr. Big had paid 120,000, and that 120,000 gives Mr. Big Side the right to borrow at 5.75. It's a right, it's not an obligation. It gives Mr. Big the right to borrow at 5.75%. However, assuming that the interest rate on December 16 is 5.53, if you are Mr. Big, what will you do? Will you exercise that option and borrow at 5.75%, or you will let the option go and then go to the market and borrow at 5.53? What will you do, Mr. Big Hat? What will you do and why? Let me hear someone's voice. What will you do? You have an option, it's a right, but it's not an obligation to borrow at 5.75. But right in the market, banks are giving out loan at 5.53. So what will you do? Will you take that option and borrow at 5.5? Will you take the option and borrow at 5.75, or you let the option go and go to the market and borrow at 5.53? What will you do? Let's hear someone's voice. You have quite a number here. So what will you do? It's a straightforward decision. Now, you want what is easier for you. You want what is cheaper, right? So because you want what is cheaper and easier, all you will just do is to say, please let the option go because the option is more expensive. So because the option is more expensive, you let the option go, and then you go to the market and borrow at 5.53 because this is lower. Now, what if the other situation was the case? So a situation where on December 16th, interest rate had moved to 7.03. That is the interest rate in the market. But you have an option that gives you the right. You're not obligated to take it. It's a right to borrow at 5.75. Would you take the option and borrow at 5.75? Or you would say, I'm not taking the option. Let me go and borrow in the market at 7.03. What would you do here, Mr. Big Heart? What would you do? It's pretty straightforward as well. We want a lower interest rate. Okay, well, I get that. So we want a lower interest rate. So we'll tell Mr. Big Heart, I have an option, which is a right. I have an option, which is a right to do this. So I'm going to take the option. Yes, I will take the option. Now let's look at what our gain would be from the decision. In this first scenario, you did not take the option, so you didn't have anything to gain out of it. You didn't take the option, so you didn't have anything to gain. However, in this second scenario, you took an option of borrowing at 5.75. If you had gone to the market, you would have borrowed at 7.03. But because you have an option, you are able to borrow at 5.75. So what gain in interest rate do you have from this option? So it is 7.03, 7.03 minus 5.75. So you make a gain from this decision of 1.31% is the interest rate you save because you decided to go with option. All right, so let's quickly evaluate. Let's look at all of the options we've done. So we've looked at the FRA, we've looked at futures, and then we've looked at options as well. Okay, so we can explain to Mr. Bighart the financial implication of all of them. So let's look at them quickly. If Mr. Bighart had bought an FRA, which is the first one we solve, what is the interest rate, the LIBOR interest rate of an FRA? Where's our FRA? It was the first one we solved. FRA, yeah. Our interest rate without the fixed element is the same for everybody. So whether you're doing FRA, you're doing futures, or doing option, the fixed element is the same. So if Mr. Bighart had done FRA, he's looking at 7.08%. If you had done FRA, he's looking at 7.08%. So let's note our figures from all of the three. So summary. FRA, you would get 7.08%. That is the interest rate that Mr. Bighart will lock in if you had gone with FRA, which is our forward rate agreement. If you had gone with futures, looking at LIBOR, the fixed element of 90 basis points is the same, regardless of whichever decision you make. So our future, if you had gone for futures, what is the rate that we arrived at for futures? 6.18 as our LIBOR. Forget the fixed element. That is the same for everybody. So it doesn't change our decision. 6.18%. That's what we have under futures. 6.18%. And if you had gone for options, based on the approach we adopted, you would have the right to borrow at 5.75%. So if Mr. Bigheart were to pick one out of these three to hedge, which one are we going to recommend? Clearly the lowest one, because we want a lower interest rate as a borrower. So we can say, based on the three, that the recommended hedging strategy is the option at a rate of 5.75%. However, out of the three, option will require that you pay a premium down. So you need to account for that. You need to note that as well. However, this will require Mr. Bigheart to pay an upfront premium of 120,000 naira, which is what we calculated right here. So depending on whether you're using this method or you're using this method of 120,000. Okay. So that's been our consideration of interest rate. We've